Hello, everyone, and welcome to the difference of web development. In this video, I want to take just a few moments, not too much of your time here, but to kind of introduce what it is you're going to be learning starting this week and in subsequent weeks throughout this course. What we're going to talk about, for the most part, is what you've done so far, at least for the most of you throughout the curriculum up to this point. And then also talk about what a client server is all about. And then with that, we'll kind of describe a little bit about what we're going to be learning as we move forward, like I said, with the rest of this course. All right. So your development training so far. So far, for most of you anyway, you've created programs that were more Windows and console based. Basically, what I mean by that, you created a GUI, right? You probably dragged and dropped stuff in the Visual Studio type of environments. You put text boxes, you put other controls on there, buttons, and so on, and then you basically wrote programs based upon the events on those GUIs. Or maybe you've taken the Python class, or you've taken other classes where it's been more console-based, meaning you wrote code that would collect input off the console and then process it accordingly. So that's pretty much what you've done up to this point. And it's all based upon really everything working on your PC, the processing working on your PC, and then the interface working on your PC. When it comes to web programming, that's there's a change there. And what I usually like to do when I talk about this is talk about how what goes around comes around. I always liked aging myself quite a bit. But back in my day, we used mainframe computers. When I first started out of college, everything we did was on mainframe computers, IBM, big mainframe computers that took up almost the entire floor that you may see at Cincinnati State. These computers basically ran everything. All the processing was done on the computers, and then what was on everybody's desk was called a dummy terminal, meaning at that point in time, it didn't do anything. It was a terminal. It literally was a green screen. All it did was basically show what was on the mainframe computer. It was literally connected, it hard connected, I should say, right to the mainframe. So it had no capabilities of its own, this dummy terminal. Everything was really just connected to the mainframe. A little bit later on in my career, not too long after that, probably about 5 years or so, we started seeing the distributed processing coming to play, where the processing was now done on PCs, as we know them today, your desktop type PCs, where all the processors and everything are now in there. So instead of having a mainframe computer, one sole computer, we had a distributed processing type of scenario where the processing, a lot of our software was done solely on the PC itself. It wasn't connected to anything. And so we thought the years of the mainframe processing was all over with. PCs was the way to go. It was going to really enhance everything we did. And for the most part, it did. So when we talk about the mainframe and these dummy PCs type of processing, it was considered client server even back in those days, meaning all the processing, as I said before, was completed on the server and the results were pushed to the dummy computer. That's just basically how it worked. It was very slow. It was nothing like you know today, but it was very slow. But when it came to web programming and, really the latest of all of that, and almost, to me, probably the most important thing that you'll probably be learning in the curriculum, how to develop web-based applications, because we're so used to them now, and there are so many of them. And for the most part, I can honestly say that probably for the last 20 years, it's the only thing I have written professionally, or those types of things. We now look back and we see it's all client processing again, meaning we have to write the code that a web server, wherever the web server is located at, and we'll talk about that in subsequent videos, does all the processing, and the client is now a device. And these devices, as we know them, are PCs, laptops, tablets, phones, watches, whatever is connected to the internet processing something. I might be inclusive of all the devices there, but probably not. So the web server, in a sense, is the mainframe doing all the processing, And these devices are now the client. It's the ones that we have to, where the user, meaning the person using your application, literally interfaces with the processor, meaning the web server. These web servers are located all around the world. It's basically where we'll put our code. You'll learn about them in this class. We'll supply you with a web server and show you how to get on one, give you your own URL so people can actually get on it if you want them to. All right, so it's important to understand that in today's world, when it comes to web programming, that we are literally back into this client server. And to actually write web programs, it's kind of a two-phased approach here. There's a front end and there's a back end. You may have heard those terms before. If you haven't, that's usually what you hear. The front end, for the most part, is what the user see and interacts with. And so that's the form, that's the Windows form that you probably have devised before. But we need to do it for the web. And to do it for the web, we got to learn things like HTML, JavaScript, cascading style sheets, jQuery, responsive, Angular, React. The list keeps going on and new things come out every day. So that's what this is all about. So in this course, you're going to learn a few of these things. Maybe not all of them and not completely all of them, but at least some of the basics so you can actually write web application programs, or at least start to write web application programs. Primarily HTML. We're going to learn that extensively over the next few weeks. And we'll get into some JavaScript, cascading style sheets, and so on as the course progresses. The back end is really all about then the logic. And this is what is actually executed on the web server. So the web server, when we'll put our code onto the web server, and that code will be our logic and our databases and our database calls. So logic being PHP, C#, Java, Python, etc. There's a lot of languages now that you can write that can be placed on a web server and actually executed. For this particular course, Web Programming 1, we're going to focus on PHP. In Web Programming 2, we'll get into C#, ASP.NET C#, MVC, or whatever the current versions are of that. But that's where all that logic pertains, okay? And that's where we have to be able to differentiate. So our goal for all of this is to be able to learn how to write a little bit of front end and a lot of back end. But the art of it all is learning how to interface the two. So it's a lot different than probably anything else you've done in regards to simply double clicking on a button and writing code behind it. We got to basically write two separate pieces of code, and we have to tell the computer that from the client, okay, I'm ready to send this back to the web server, wherever that is located at. The web server will do their stuff, re-render the HTML, and push it back to the client, which will then be back with HTML onto our browsers. Now, if all this has confused you, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to confuse you. I'm just basically saying that I want you to understand there is a relationship to what you've done so far. Basically, a Windows form to, again, an event-driven type of logic. In this case, we're going to use an HTML form, which will be the same thing as a Windows form, but we got to learn a little bit of HTML first to do this. And then we will actually use an event. We'll probably trap the event using something like JavaScript and so on. But then the logic will actually be on a totally different computer, a totally different web server, and we got to tell it, we got to pass the data to it, and then we get that data on the web server and we process and do our database calls and so on. That's really what we're going to be learning. It's not all that hard, and once you get used to it, it's no big deal, but it's a little bit different, especially a passing of data. But there's a lot of similarities too, and we'll try to provide you with enough analogies to everything you already know to make this actually quite simple and hopefully a lot of fun.